There was no glamour in their lives, only suspicion, broken families, and fear behind closed doors. In 1999, while American audiences were settling into their couches every Sunday night to watch Tony Soprano navigate panic attacks and power struggles in North Caldwell, New Jersey, the actual mob family that inspired much of the show's architecture was being listened to by the FBI. The DeCavalcante crime family, New Jersey's only independently recognized La Cosa Nostra family, based out of Elizabeth, had been under federal surveillance for decades. What those wiretaps captured in the late 1990s was remarkable. Members of the DeCavalcante family were watching The Sopranos and recognizing themselves in it, not with pride, with the particular discomfort of men who understood that the camera had gotten too close. Federal surveillance recordings cited in court proceedings and reported by investigative journalists covering the DeCavalcante prosecutions captured members discussing the show in terms that alarmed them. One recorded conversation included a member stating the show was depicting their world with uncomfortable accuracy. For the FBI agents monitoring those conversations, it was confirmation of something they already knew. That David Chase, whether through research, instinct, or sources, had constructed a fictional world that mapped onto the real one with disturbing precision. The DeCavalcante family had a history stretching back to the mid-20th century. Their boss, Sam DeCavalcante, known as Sam the Plumber, had himself been extensively wiretapped by the FBI in the 1960s, those recordings later revealing the inner workings of La Cosa Nostra in granular detail. The family that followed him maintained the same insular, paranoid structure, and when a television show arrived that seemed to know their rhythms, their language, their domestic arrangements, their specific anxieties, they didn't feel celebrated. They felt exposed. That distinction matters, because glamour is something you feel when the world sees you the way you want to be seen. What the DeCavalcante wiretaps captured was something else entirely. The show made them famous. The wiretaps made them federal defendants. Tony Soprano's therapy sessions with Dr. Melfi are among the most celebrated sequences in television history. They gave audiences a window into the psychology of a man carrying the weight of a criminal empire, his anxieties, his childhood wounds, his contradictions. It was brilliant, humanizing television, and it bore almost no relationship to how real mob leadership processed the psychological burden of their position. FBI surveillance operations targeting New Jersey organized crime figures throughout the 1980s and 1990s, including the extensive electronic monitoring that built the federal cases against DeCavalcante family leadership, reveal men living under a specific and unrelenting form of psychological pressure that had no therapeutic outlet. Real mob bosses could not confide in anyone. The organizational culture of La Cosa Nostra made vulnerability a liability. Showing weakness to associates invited challenges to authority. Showing weakness to family members created vectors for federal pressure. The isolation was structural and absolute. Don Riggi, the DeCavalcante family's boss through much of the 1980s and 1990s, ran the Nickens organization from prison after his 1990 conviction on racketeering charges, communicating through intermediaries, managing a criminal enterprise through layers of insulation, designed to maintain his authority while limiting his legal exposure. That is not a man relaxing by a pool watching his ducks. That is a man performing an exhausting and ultimately futile act of institutional maintenance from a federal correctional facility. The paranoia was not dramatic in the television sense. It was grinding, daily, and cumulative. FBI surveillance logs from organized crime investigations of this period document subjects checking for tails on routine errands, refusing to discuss business on any telephone, conducting meetings while walking to defeat directional microphones. Mental architecture required to sustain that level of operational security indefinitely, while also managing violence, money, and personnel, without a therapist, without genuine confidants, without any legitimate institutional support, was a psychological burden the show dramatized beautifully, and the reality delivered mercilessly. The couch in Melfi's office was the one luxury the real bosses never had. There is a scene in The Sopranos where Tony Soprano, frustrated with the state of his organization, laments that he came in at the end of something great. It is one of the show's most quoted lines. And in one specific, unintended sense, the financial sense, it was more accurate than the writers may have realized. FBI financial investigation records and federal asset forfeiture documents from organized crime prosecutions in New Jersey and the broader New York metropolitan area during the 1990s and 2000s present a picture of criminal enterprise that bears almost no resemblance to the comfortable suburban wealth the show depicted. Sopranos' world was one of boats, restaurants, construction contracts, and a financial cushion that allowed its characters to absorb losses and maintain lifestyle. The documented reality of street-level and mid-tier mob economics was closer to a permanent cash flow crisis. Associates, the men who did the actual work of the organization, operated on a tribute system that moved money relentlessly upward. They paid a percentage of their earnings to their capos. Capos paid a percentage upward to administration. The men at the bottom of that structure, taking the greatest legal risks and absorbing the most direct law enforcement pressure, frequently found themselves financially squeezed between their criminal overhead and their personal obligations. Federal asset forfeiture proceedings from DeCavalcante and Lucchese family cases during this period reveal seized assets that were, in many cases, modest cars, not fleets, small properties, not estates, bank accounts that reflected the economic reality of men who were perpetually funding lawyers, funding bribes, funding tribute, and funding the basic operational costs of maintaining criminal enterprise. The legal costs alone were devastating. Single federal RICO prosecution could consume hundreds of thousands of dollars in defense, fees, money that came directly out of whatever the enterprise had generated. Men who had spent decades building criminal income found themselves financially gutted by the very prosecutions their lifestyle had made inevitable. They paid for the life twice, once to live it, and once when it ended. The Sopranos depicted violence as a recurring operational tool, sudden, emotionally charged, and woven into the fabric of everyday mob life. Characters were killed over slights, over debts, over power struggles, the frequency that gave the show its dramatic pulse. It was compelling television. It was also, according to the documented record of how real organized crime violence was, authorized and executed, a significant departure from operational reality. Federal prosecutors who built RICO cases against New Jersey and New York organized crime families throughout the 1980s and 1990s have been consistent in their public statements about one specific aspect of mob violence, its rarity relative to popular perception, and the elaborate organizational process required to sanction it. Murder within La Cosa Nostra required approval, not suggestion, not consensus among friends, formal approval from family administration. Killing of a made member, a fully initiated member of the organization, required authorization that went to the highest levels of family leadership, and, in cases involving members of other families, required inter-family consultation. This is documented extensively in federal trial records, including the commission case prosecuted by Rudy Giuliani's office in the mid-1980s, which established on the record the governance structure of La Cosa Nostra and the formal processes by which major decisions, including murders, were made. The reason for this structure was not moral, it was organizational. Unsanctioned violence created enemies, triggered vendettas, attracted law enforcement attention, and destabilized the political arrangements between families that allowed criminal enterprise to function. Tommy DeSimone's unauthorized killing of Billy Batts, documented in FBI records and federal testimony, was precisely the kind of organizational breach that the structure existed to prevent. Real mob violence, when it occurred, was the product of deliberation, not impulse, and the men who ordered it lived with the federal consequences of that deliberation for the rest time of their lives. In the real mob, killing someone was paperwork, and the paperwork always came back. The final scene of The Sopranos is one of the most analyzed moments in television history. The cut to black, the ambiguity, the audience left suspended between Tony's survival and his death. It was a finale, constructed for debate, for interpretation, for the kind of cultural conversation that sustains a show's legacy for decades. The real New Jersey Mob's conclusion was constructed for none of those things. It was built, piece by piece, in federal courtrooms, through cooperating witness agreements, and across decades of RICO prosecutions that systematically dismantled the organizational infrastructure the DeCavalcante family had spent half a century constructing. John Riggi, the family's longtime boss, died in 2015, having spent the last significant portion of his life cycling between federal prison and supervised release. The family's leadership structure had been fractured by prosecutions in the 1990s and 2000s that removed multiple administration-level figures. By the mid-2000s, federal law enforcement officials were publicly describing the DeCavalcante family as significantly weakened, reduced in membership, reduced in earning capacity, reduced in the organizational coherence that had once made them a recognized independent entity within the La Cosa Nostra structure. There was no dramatic final confrontation. There was no ambiguous cut to black. There was a slow institutional hemorrhaging. Members flipping, members dying, members aging out of a criminal world that was itself becoming structurally obsolete as the economic opportunities that had sustained mob enterprise for decades shifted away from the industries and territories the families had controlled. The New Jersey waterfront, construction, garbage. These were the arteries of mob economic power. As federal oversight, industry reform, and changing urban economics altered those sectors, the revenue that had sustained the organization contracted. What replaced it was insufficient. What remained was a diminished organization performing the rituals of an institution that had already, in every meaningful sense, ceased to exist. The show ended with a question mark. The real story ended with a filing cabinet full of guilty pleas. Sopranos told the truth about organized crime, the way a great painting tells the truth about face. It captured something essential, while inevitably leaving something out. David Chase built a world of extraordinary psychological depth and moral complexity. The audience that fell in love with Tony Soprano, debated his fate and mourned his contradictions, was engaging with a character specifically constructed to be engaging. The real men who ran the DeCavalcante family, who wiretapped themselves talking about the show that was supposedly about them, were not constructed for audience sympathy. They were documented in FBI surveillance logs, federal indictments, and cooperating witness testimony as men who extorted, intimidated, corrupted, and in documented cases, ordered the deaths of other human beings to protect revenue streams and any organizational hierarchy. The suburban comfort was largely myth. The psychological glamour was entirely myth. What was real was the paranoia, the legal exposure, the financial precariousness, and the institutional violence of an organization in long-term decline, convincing itself it was still at the height of its power. Men who inspired The Sopranos did not live like Tony Soprano. They lived like what they actually were, mid-level criminals in a weakening organization, operating under federal surveillance, watching their world contract around them one prosecution at a time. The show gave them mythology. The FBI gave them reality. And reality, in the end, is the only story that doesn't get canceled. It just gets filed into evidence.